We'll be starting the recording of the session, and I hope you all can see our screens. I would like to sort of introduce our speaker, keynote speaker for this session, and it's really a great pleasure to introduce Livio Sandria from the United Nations sort of development program. So Livio is UNDP's global advisor for business and human rights, and he's based in Hong Kong, where he has been leading the program on business and human rights in Asia. So this session is going to focus on the various areas, especially around the Asia policies on the responsible business. We'll also look at the national action plans. So what I will do, without further ado, I'll just pass the session to Livio, where he will start presentation from his side. Livio, over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Vishal. I want to start by greeting all the participants that I see are coming in growing numbers. And of course, thanking Sedex for the opportunity to address you all and to tell you a little bit more about a little bit of our work, but mostly an overview of how I have seen the scenario, the discourse of business and human rights evolving in the last 4 or 5 years in Asia. As Vishal said at the beginning, I am a global advisor of UNDP on business and human rights, but today I will be wearing mostly my hat as an advisor to the business and human rights program in Asia, which is actually where our work as UNDP has started. Our work, just in brief, to frame where my reflections come from, is part of a program which focuses on the implementation of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which I am assuming most of you or all of you are aware of. Obviously, I'll be very happy to take any questions and clarify about the UN Guiding Principles as the standards of responsible business offered by the United Nations since 2011. Let me share my screen and go on my slides, where again I will illustrate you some reflections, again a consequence of my almost 5 years of work now in supporting implementation of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights in Asia. I have summarized in this first slide five issues that, in my view, signal the growing momentum vis-a-vis business and human rights in our region. And I have to say that the growing momentum is the consequence of a baseline of knowledge about business and human rights, knowledge about the UN Guiding Principles, which was very, very low 4 or 5 years ago when UNDP started this initiative. For us, a milestone was an event in 2016 that took place in Singapore, where we organized with other partners the first regional forum on business and human rights in Asia. And in fact, that first forum was called Regional Forum for Corporate Social Responsibility and Human Rights. So it signals, the very title of that event, a moment of passage between what had been until then corporate social responsibility and what would become, in the years to come, business and human rights discourse. So that's the first point that I want to make. I really feel that in the last 4 or 5 years, Asia has grown from an approach to responsible business, which was mainly based on CSR, on corporate social responsibility, on those approaches that are now increasingly seen as philanthropic in nature, to an approach that looks at actual compliance with human rights standards as offered by the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. So we hear less and less about CSR, and we hear more and more about BHR, business and human rights, from governments, from companies, and obviously from civil society. This is not only a semantic issue, it's really a shift in mind, which we are really pleasing to see progressing month by month, year by year. And this is due, and I'm going to the first point, to increased awareness on the need for sustainable business practices and standards to achieve them. So there's been in the last 4 years a lot of opportunities for governments, for companies, even before governments, I have to say, to become aware of the importance of sustainable business practices, and to become aware of both the ethic reasons for it, right? So the importance of respecting human rights, but also, if I may put it that way, the business reason for it, the business case for being responsible in operating as a company. And obviously, I'm referring to managing risks of reputational nature, managing risks of legal nature, and managing risks of operational nature that are increasingly associated with practices which are against human rights principles. So there's been a lot of effort by the United Nations, by UNDP, and indeed many other actors, including, of course, Sedex, in raising awareness of, one, of the importance of sustainable business practices, two, on how to go about being sustainable and responsible as a business. We've been approached more and more by companies and by governments, but certainly by governments, interested in conducting the human rights due diligence processes and wanting to know how do we go about it. And again, of course, this is something that also Sedex is doing a lot. So again, certainly point one, an increased awareness of the need for sustainable business practices. The second reason for this growing momentum is a peer learning moment, an healthy competition which started at the governmental level between countries, between governments, mostly in ASEAN and more recently also in other sub-regions, including South Asia. So there was a number of governments, Thailand as the most prominent, that at some point in 2014, 2015 embraced the UN Guiding Principle Business and Human Rights and visibly moved towards a policy on responsible business by starting a process of developing a national action plan on business and human rights. This spurred an internal in Thailand process of developing the plan, a multi-stakeholder process, brought a high level of discourse within Thailand of the importance of responsible business, to which companies really participated along with civil society. Now, the move that Thailand made in 2015 encouraged, inspired other countries in the region, Indonesia first, and then Malaysia, and then eventually also Vietnam, to undertake similar action, so come up with similar policies, again, in most of the cases called national action plans on business and human rights, which sets policies for the government and set expectations from the companies to behave responsibly. So again, there are 5 or 6 such processes ongoing, all of which are being supported by UNDP in this moment. I'm happy to give you more details. I'll just mention at this stage that together with the NAP National Action Plan in Thailand already adopted, Indonesia is currently drafting a National Action Plan, and so is actually Mongolia, Malaysia, Pakistan, and India. These are the countries in the regions that are drafting a National Action Plan on business and human rights. Japan, in fact, is also drafting one, and Korea already adopted a similar plan. Many other countries are considering it. So I want to signal here a move from the policy side at the governmental level to speak to trade partners and say, and basically pass the message that Asia wants to offer cleaner and greener supply chains. The third point that helped the momentum in Asia is what is before all of our eyes almost every day, a growing presence on media of the importance of responsible business. We hardly a day goes by without us opening a newspaper or a magazine, or indeed by going through social media and seeing not seeing articles that point to responsible or irresponsible practices of companies. So what was called before the UNGPs this naming and shaming, an approach perhaps too harsh, has now been replaced by a knowing and showing campaigns by media outlets that are pointing out those companies that are acting responsibly, and also pointing out those that are acting not so responsibly. And obviously this has encouraged those same companies to remediate when they were pointed to as abusing rights, or actually to come in with campaigns when they are acting responsibly, because they believe, and rightly so, that acting responsibly is actually an encouragement to consumer to use their products. The fourth point is a growing pressure from consumers and investors. This is again something that especially the multinationals are feeling very strongly. Consumers of products are increasingly interested in understanding where their products come from, whether their mobile phones or their products that they eat or that they use are or not linked to practices such as forced labor, child labor, land grabbing, and so on. Again, consumers are more and more tuned into that. And as such, companies have understood the importance of showing how respectful they are of rights. The same pressure comes of investors. We see again over and over the pressure of the investor on meeting ESG standards, with the S of ESG being largely the human rights compliance. I'll mention just one most recent examples of a group of 36 large investors totaling $4.1 trillion of investment, writing an open letter to the government of Indonesia as a result of the omnibus law, which some of you may be aware of, is a law that was recently passed in Indonesia that is seen by many as restricting some labor rights and restricting some of the environmental reporting requirements. So the investors openly criticize the government for passing legislation which seems to go in the opposite direction of where the global discourse is going vis-a-vis sustainable investment. The last point that I will signal in terms of growing momentum is new and upcoming requirements from trading partners. Most prominently, the EU has been speaking, EU member states and the EU as an organization been speaking about the importance of mandatory environmental and human rights due diligence, which will be introducing in 2021 for EU member states. And this, of course, has asked those companies from the EU to make sure that their supply chains, which are very often present in Asia, are clean and green, because the requirement for human rights and environmental due diligence for European companies are for that due diligence to be carried out throughout their supply chains. Hence, again, a positioning of suppliers in Asia as being able to continue working with European companies while showing that they are respectful of human rights standards. So these are 5 trends that I think have contributed greatly in the momentum in Asia. This slide is just a slide that illustrates what I mentioned earlier. This is the situation on the other side of the globe of the investors, of the company from the EU. And You see a lot of flags in there that refer to ongoing national initiatives at the EU level vis-a-vis mandatory human rights due diligence. And as I said earlier, there is also an EU level initiative on introducing environmental and human rights due diligence. These data, again, are pushing Asia as a continent, governments and companies, to align with the scenario required by the EU. So here's some evidence of progress that I have collected. The first of which is what I mentioned earlier, national action plans on business and human rights, which has been adopted in some cases and will be adopted soon in some other cases. And the national action plans are essentially planning documents, as the word says, at the governmental level. So they list actions by the government, but also set clear expectations for companies to behave. So they go also into what is called the Pillar 2 of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Once again, Thailand is the most advanced of these cases, but Indonesia, Malaysia, Pakistan, and India are working on similar instruments, and Japan, in fact. Vietnam is considering a national action plan on responsible business. The second evidence of progress that I wanted to highlight is the growth of regional partnerships. A growing number of actors, including UNDP, but not limited to that, certainly OECD and many other actors in the UN, and certainly the EU itself as an active partner of our initiative on business and human rights, that have been focusing on supporting the implementation of the UN Guiding Principle on Business and Human Rights. And these partnerships with all types of stakeholders, with governments, with businesses, with civil society, have coagulated most recently and in each of the years since 2016 into regional forums on business and human rights, which UNDP has actually been organizing. And the numbers of participants to these regional forums has grown exponentially in the last couple of years, again showing the growth of the moment. Third evidence of progress is increased number of requests from companies to receive trainings on human rights due diligence and support in carrying out the human rights due diligence and human rights impact assessments. This is a growing request that certainly has impacted UNDP and I'm sure many other actors. So with the awareness of companies growing on the importance of respecting human rights, their interest in understanding how to go about it has also grown rapidly, at least from my observation, and most recently has grown also in relation to managing human rights risks in times of COVID-19. I will share later a specific tool that we have developed specifically to help companies in managing human rights risks related to COVID-19. The fourth point that I will mention in terms of evidence of progress is an increasing examples of remediation. So the UN Guiding Principles of Business and Human Rights say that when violations do occur, remedies, grievance mechanism remedies should be available and compensation, remediation should also follow. We have seen in the last couple of years growing numbers of cases when those that brought about their grievances eventually did receive remediation. And again, articles on the media have amplified the action taken by companies to compensate and to remediate for abuses that they were attached to. In these slides, I'm just giving you just illustrates in greater detail the ongoing processes of policy changes taking place around Asia. And I summarize here the countries which I think are most advanced. Thailand, indeed, as the one that has progressed the most and has very detailed expectations set for companies. India also drafting a national action plan on business and human rights, but also doing something else. India adopted very recently a set of national guidance for responsible business conduct, which is a similar document to the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, which again instructs companies on the expectations vis-a-vis their responsible operations. It goes beyond human rights, in fact. Again, you see on the right side, Indonesia, relatively close to finalizing a NAP. Japan also close. I'm told hopefully by the end of this year should be finalizing a national action plan on business and human rights. Mongolia working very hard on it, but probably will need another extra year to finalize it, and Malaysia progressing in that direction, but also probably not adopting an app before 2021 or 2022. Lastly, Pakistan also progressing very rapidly on that. So again, here is a picture of a policy discourse vis-a-vis business and human rights, which is growing quite fast. I'm looking at my watch to make sure I stay within the time allocated. Here, just flagging with this slide that the policy commitment in Thailand was taken by the very leadership of the government, which really was a very strong signal, not only internally, but externally to the trade partners that obviously Thailand wants to talk to, giving a different image than the one has been having until a few years ago, where Thailand was associated with abuses in the fishing sector, now wanting to speak to trading partner, mainly the EU, by offering again cleaner and greener supply chains. This is just an example of how the NAP on business and human rights sets expectations for companies. I can come back to that only if there is greater interest. I want to go on this last slide before I pause and perhaps see if there are some questions. That along with progress, which is certainly notable, there are some persistence and new challenges in Asia. And the most persistent and perhaps growing challenge is the one of harassment and killing, sadly, of human rights defenders that, again, in growing number, unfortunately, suffer reprisals for their work on pointing out human rights abuses. This is also the consequence on increased awareness, increased activism, and as such, more reprisals. The second challenge that I will point out is that though there was progress, and I mentioned some of that in quite a few countries, there are still very large pockets of Asia. There are many countries where the discourse on business and human rights is at the very, very beginning. So I'm signaling here not only many challenges still taking place when it comes to forced labor, child labor, environmental impacts and land rights issues from indigenous communities. So persisting problems, and again, awareness being still very low in many countries. So still a picture which is mixed as far as Asia is concerned. And then the third challenge that I would say is a certain slowing down or stall in some cases of progress in the last 4 years due to the COVID-19, which made human rights impact assessments and communication between companies and rights holders more complicated, admittedly, because of the very problem of COVID-19. And at the same time, COVID-19 brought in additional risks, additional human rights issues, which are specifically linked to the pandemic, that many companies have been slow in in capturing and working on. This is my last slide. I just want to point out that specifically to help companies in analyzing and hopefully then addressing the specific human rights risk related to the COVID-19 pandemic, we came up in June this year with this Human Rights Due Diligence and COVID-19, a rapid self-assessment tool, which essentially is a checklist for companies that unpacks the specific risks related to the COVID-19 moment. It's been translated in 10 languages, many of which Asian languages, as a matter of fact, and are of course publicly available to companies, to suppliers, and to anybody that wants to assess in this unfortunate moment of COVID-19 that we are all still in, where they want to assess the human rights risks that they are prone to. I think I'll leave it at that. This is just, maybe I'll just leave this slide on. This is a picture of, again, the countries where UNDP is currently active and working on with support of a number of partners, which you see on the left side. I think I'll leave it at that, Vishal, and be very open to any question or clarification that might be required.
Perfect. Thank you, Livio. Thank you for such a wonderful session, being information given to us as well. Unfortunately, we run out of the time, but in a great interest, I just want to ask one question, especially from the SMEs, which is the small, medium enterprises. So how do you support, let's say, the SMEs to look at the businesses and the human rights and how they can start, probably those who doesn't have idea, let's say, how the UNDP could support them? If you could briefly answer that one.
I'll be very brief. The first thing that I would ask them to do is to read the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, mainly Pillar 2. It's a very user-friendly document where with a very brief reading, you get a lot of the picture of what the expectations from companies are. When it comes to human rights due diligence, there's a number of tools available. MSMEs, we all recognize, do not have the same resources that big companies have to carry out human rights due diligence. But their duty, their responsibility to carry out human rights due diligence is also there because it applies to all companies, though is considered by the UN Guiding Principles proportional to the capacities of that company. We carry out human rights due diligence training if necessary. We have made some tools available, including the one that I have just shown. I'll be happy to share it with Sedex if you don't have it, and by all means use it with your members, and we'll be happy to provide you more information on that. I see the time is running out.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Livio, for the information. And yes, indeed, we have run out of time now. So I just encourage all the audience, if you do have some questions, please do reach out to our teams, original teams. And again, the next session will be starting soon. So please use the Sedex APAC, the community hub, to join the next session. Thank you very much, Livio.
Thank you all.